I'm just an incredibly free spirit. My spirit is so free and untamed. It's wild and untamed. I'm just like pretty much one with the African safari. The way that my spirit is. My spirit is unquenchable. It's unfathomable, unquenchable. My spirit will not be denied. It is persevering and unrelenting. My spirit will not stop. It is my spirit, and it is insured by my Spirit Airlines Insurance. Spirit Airlines Insurance. It's insured by Spirit Airlines Insurance. Well, thank you for coming back to listen to me again. For hearing to me to listen again. What am I going to talk about today? I don't even know. I did not decide beforehand what I was going to talk about. I just wanted to I just wanted to bask in the ability to record myself on a regular afternoon. And I'm glad that this afternoon could be brought to you in part by viewers like you and others of the underrepresented communities. And no, not to trivialize underrepresentation, but underrepresentation can apply to lots of things. You can be underrepresented in any one area. Like I'm underrepresented in peace because I don't represent myself. Like peace is underrepresented in me because it cannot be found within me. I'm not peaceful. I am turbulent and torrential. Not torrential, unstable. I'm unstable and I'm turbulent, and my spirit cannot be denied. And my spirit is an unquenchable thirst for knowledge and spirit, and for explanation of itself. But we all know about the power of words. Everybody knows about the power of words. I kind of was thinking about that I recorded that Ben Shapiro episode, and my remorse got to me because I didn't actually talk that much about Ben Shapiro. So I guess I'm just giving assessment from my opinion of Ben Shapiro is that when he came on the scene in the 2016 election, people were dumbfounded at his intelligence and his lightning speed delivery because they hadn't really seen anything quite like that before. And I think in a lot of people's minds, they're like, he will run for president one day. He's the chosen one of sorts. Like he's because he can do things that no conservative pundit had been able to do before that they had ever seen. Like Ben Shapiro is exactly what conservatives wanted and needed to see around the time of the 2016 election. But there's a number of outlets, conservative outlets, that were getting fame in the 2016 election. The Daily Wire was one of them. I mean, I don't know how long they were there before that, but like, was Ben Shapiro at Breitbart before he was at the Daily Wire or something, or is that somebody else? That was somebody else, I think. I don't really remember. Some other big name. But there's like Breitbart News was having a big 2016 election. And it's just that Ben Shapiro combines that quick-witted, fast logic right in your face. Like, he'll just chop you up with his logic, and the speed with which he delivers it is the value that people started to understand in Ben Shapiro in 2016. Because he would, like, there's all these clips circulating at the time and still today, just of all the debates that he's been in where he'll answer something really quick and like just give a really quick summary rundown of how closing down small businesses will hollow out the economy or whatever, like the dangers of higher taxes destroying small business owners or whatever. Totally, like, from a conservative viewpoint, especially 2016 conservative viewpoint. Answer like that's going to advocate for small businesses is exactly what people wanted in 2016. And they're like, Ben Shapiro, please run for president one day so that conservatism will reign supreme, just like we always wanted. We love you, Ben Shapiro. We'd give our first child for you. We dream of you. You're like the dream of our ancestors. We wish that you would just guide us and lead us. And the dream is still alive for some. I mean, he's just like the conservative of all conservatives, seeing as that he uses words to his advantage so brilliantly. Like I'm not gonna hand out compliments like that that often, but like he does that pretty brilliantly, I would say, because you don't really. That's too much a superlative. I don't need to credit people with that kind of a compliment. It's like, but whatever. I guess you can call some people's delivery brilliant. But Ben Shapiro, he just doesn't give a fuck, and that's what people admire. But he actually doesn't give a fuck sometimes. It's surprising. I'm surprised to see the adamancy with which he is attacking the protest movement. Like that's pretty blatant. He's pretty against them, and pretty quick after it happened, like while people were still entranced by the spell of all the people who were angry on Twitter, so that they weren't gonna say a single word against the protest movement. Like while in the aftermath of the protest movement for about a month, like nobody even said a thing. Ben Shapiro was like talking about it pretty early on, having a contradictory opinion. So it's like, I guess he is willing to go that far, and he's the ultimate conservative because he is part of a traditional religion, and he partakes in it regularly. Like he's a devout Jew. That's a big part of his life. He's devoutly religious and traditional in some sense. So like that makes him good to go as far as conservatism is concerned. He's got that conserving attitude about him, where he conserves. And so that's good for Ben Shapiro. Like I'm making up for any commentary I could have made about Ben Shapiro, in my opinion. Besides that, he's like has a really fast delivery, and all the conservatives love that shit because he's a primary conservative because of his ability to use language. Because a conservative commentator is somebody who uses logic and uses a lot of words. Yeah, like uses lots of words to get their point across because they're word people, but like they use the English language. And I saw a clip where Joe Rogan was commenting on Ben Shapiro, and he was like, Ben Shapiro, he was talking to somebody else about Ben Shapiro, and he's like, Ben Shapiro, he's a really great, like whatever he is, radio talk show host, journalist, whatever, philanthropist, who knows, whatever he was saying about him. He's like, he's just got a really great grasp on the English language. That's what Joe Rogan had to say about Ben Shapiro. Like, I don't think I would be that much of an ass just to write Ben Shapiro off as has an excellent grasp on the English language. Yeah, I know you're gonna say, like, most people would be like, oh, that's a compliment. It's not like Joe Rogan was insulting him. It's just that's something that's dialogue. That's speech that you sling around when you're a leading podcaster to give yourself a competitive edge. Like, that's a competitive thing to say as far as him competing with Ben Shapiro for best podcast, like that kind of thing. He's got to throw some of that speech out there just to belittle his competitors. He wants to define them, and he's gonna try to belittle a Ben Shapiro by defining his delivery as just, oh, that's just a great grasp on the English language. So it's like, yeah, like that's his job being in the podcast game, I would say. He says things like that as if like to try to define Ben Shapiro's whole persona as just, oh, he's got a great grasp on the English language. So that's just it's an insult. It's a compliment, but like compliments are condescending, I think, as far as I know. But it depends on your opinion on a compliment. If you're a compliment giver, it's just like you have different relationships to different people have different relationships to a compliment. I'm not really a compliment giver. I guess it's not my love language or whatever. It's not my love language, and just get your love language in order. My love language is Destruction, I think. I think my love language is destruction. That's what I've always liked. It's one of my favorite things. Being that's, I wonder if that's a conservative value or a liberal value. I feel like I'm giving too much away as far as like people are going to understand I'm a conservative. Like your conservative is showing some of the episodes I've done. It's like if you talk sort of admirably about Trump even for 30 seconds, people are like, oh, conservative, and they're kind of right. Like nobody on the left is talking slightly admirably about Trump for 30 seconds. So it's like just your conservative is being exposed. And I don't aim to be a conservative in my deed and my action. Well, I guess it'd only be in your deed. Because if it was your action, then you'd start to become a liberal. I think liberals are more action-based. Conservatives are more word-based. And what does that mean? Absolutely nothing unless I explain. It means that conservatives uphold the dignity of words, and liberals uphold the dignity of your body and your actions that you do with it. Liberals uphold the dignity, they revere the physical, and the conservatives are out there revering the metaphysical, so to speak, but that's not totally true. That's not objectively true that all conservatives prefer to filter things through a metaphysical stance, or that they want a future that is more metaphysical, or they just are interested in a future that allows for the foregoing of physical things, or a future that's more imaginative, or a future more inclined towards the expression of ideas. It's like what a conservative does, more philosophical, I would say. Liberals are more authoritative, but it doesn't apply to all of them. But I'll do an episode on liberal conservative. Not now. Not now. That's not what I feel. I want to keep that in my back pocket so that I have a episode saved up. So I always have a couple episodes saved up. And so it's like you get Ben Shapiro out there. You get that Ben Shapiro guy, and he's so like, I guess I don't really know much to say about him besides that. But he's very conservative because of his word usage, because he's really great with words. Like that's kind of a conservative value. Liberals don't care so much about words. They're more in the business of attacking the sanctity of a word. They're more in the business of attacking a verbal authority like a word, and a conservative is more in the business of attacking a physical authority like a governmental body or something, or they're just more in the business of the destruction of physical authorities. Maybe they like destruction, but like liberals and conservatives both like destruction, destruction, deconstruction. But you do what you do. It's just like you live your life exactly how you wanted to, and I'm none the wiser, and people are out here just being just being the thing. It's really horrendous. People are out here just being what they were, and that's a liberal value, certainly. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a liberal value. Being what you were already. Predestination. Liberals, predestination. Liberals, predestination. Liberals like themselves a good bit of predestination. That's how they would guide their life. And a conservative likes free will. A conservative likes free will. A conservative thinks they always get to choose. That's what they think. That's your dynamic. And like a liberal likes predestination, or they want to live in a world where predestination is more the case, because they want to live in a world where they understand reality to be that you don't have choice over your identity. Conservatives believe that you have choice over your identity, generally speaking, not as applied to everybody, but like I think that's an aspect of the dynamic that doesn't get a lot of credit. Conservatives think you can choose an identity, but it's like a free will predestination thing. Conservatives are maybe I'll do the conservative whatever episode, liberal episode today. Maybe I'll just do it today. I can't seem to stop talking about it, but like there should be no end to the liberal conservative discussion. Apparently our country can't get enough of it. And but it's just that the second that I say that that's what I'm going to do, then I have to commit to it. So I'm worried about saying it. It's like, oh shit, now I have to commit to that. Nope, I'm still up in the air. It doesn't matter. I'm still like doing whatever. Oh, here I am. It doesn't. Still, I haven't made a decision. I could just be talking about anything. But I'm probably just gonna. I'll talk somewhat about the liberal conservative dynamic in today's episode. So, get yourself ready because here it comes. It's your brain is about to be inundated with speech via me, and the sound waves are going to penetrate your eardrums, and it's going to reverberate within your ears to the point that you convert the sound waves into words. I guess the same way that a record player converts sound waves into words, or converts a needle into a groove into sound waves, which actually that's not the same at all. It's just that like how do you ever explain what's actually going on with that scientifically? I have no idea. How's a needle scratching on a thing and like just making sound come out? But the sound waves are going to reverberate in your ears, or you're going to convert them into language in your brain, and you'll decide if it's false or true in your brain. You'll be like, oh, filter that out. That's false. It doesn't agree with your system that's already in place. Like if you filter out what I said as false, it's like you already have a system in place. You already have an identity, maybe. That's a way you could describe it. You already have a series of complexes that are all connected into one giant complex, where the one giant complex is just a word that I'm using for a network, where the points within the network are like definitions that you've pinpointed to be ideas that you can describe in your brain. But like a network is a word that is for the collection of all those points of reference, but a complex is also another word for it. But a complex is for like a locality of the network. Like a neighborhood within the giant network is a complex. Like the complex is just a piece of it, like a giant section of a city where the whole city is the network, or the whole city is just a giant complex composed of sub-complexes. Where take for example, the city of Columbus has many different boroughs, so to speak. Not boroughs, but they're just like subdivisions, boroughs, suburban areas. They have suburban areas, they have cities, towns, villages. They have villages near other villages, like sub-cities. I guess you call them cities. Yeah, but they're like towns, right? But they're pieces of. Some of them are related to Columbus. Some of them are their own thing, their own corporation, like their own. They get their own population, their own jurisdiction, or their own township, or whatever. Some of them are their own township, and then they have their own population. Whatever. When you go past, you're like, oh, Worthington, and then it probably shows up as like a list of cities in Ohio. Worthington does, but Clintonville is like a borough. It wouldn't show up in a list of cities of Ohio because I think it's just an area. Some of them are just an area. They don't have a defined border. But anyway, it's like you have North Columbus, you have Worthington, Dublin, Powell are some of the cities that are composed within like the giant network that is Columbus. But you could call those neighborhoods. You could call Powell, Worthington, and Dublin to be neighborhoods, which are complexes, really, with where you could describe the entire city as a complex, but it is a complex because there's many points of reference within it. For example, so it's like the city is a complex, and then you could describe subcomplexes or neighborhoods or localities within it as the Powells, Worthingtons, Hilliards, Gahannas, whatever, Grove cities of the world, of the city of the Columbus. You would describe those as subcomplexes within the giant complex, but they're subcomplex because there are many points of reference within it. There's points of reference like being people, but I guess data points on information, which like you could see a person or a business to be that, but it's just a conglomerate of stimulus and media in which there are pinpointed references that you've defined, such as people or like individual people or businesses, that are points of reference within the subcomplex that is the city, and all the subcomplexes combine to make the complex. If that's the way you want to make the dividing lines where you describe it as complex, you could describe it as a network. It's arbitrary that whatever way you describe it, overall, but as long as you are in the business of communicating, we have a number of words that are similar to each other, and you can use any one of those words to describe the city or the giant or the metropolitan area. It's a metropolitan area is a practical term that you would use if you were a real person. You wouldn't call it a complex. You wouldn't call a city a complex. You would call it a metropolitan area if you're talking about the greater Columbus area. But if you're talking about Columbus proper, then that's just the city. But the city, I think, is composed of like 850,000 people or something like that. Not proper, not just, but the county isn't the metropolitan area. But we can get into the semantics of polities as much as we want, where a polity is a governing, it can be as simple as a governing structure. Like I think a polity could be a family. But what I described to you with Powell and Hilliard and Dublin is that those are also polities, if you want to, because they're political structures or governances. A polity is like a governance. But is Clintonville a governance? I don't think so. I think it's just an area. Clintonville is just an area. And I'm not going to take any more arguments about that. And I'm having some difficulty about hearing about it, and it's making me sort of frustrated. But we have difficult things that we encounter in our life that we have to discuss and get through. And it's like the topic of Clintonville isn't something that I tread lightly on. It's not something I go into for no reason because it's a bigger deal. I take it very seriously. I take the topic of Clintonville very seriously, and that is my stance on it. But it is just an area, and if you want to cross me on that, just know that I take it very seriously. It's very difficult. It's like I'm gonna get defensive. I'm gonna get really triggered about because of my opinion, my stance on Clintonville, and how much it affects me. If I have to change that stance, I get really sensitive. I'm subject to change rapidly, or just like relatively more than the next person over based on how I defend myself over my view on Clintonville is what would make me sensitive about it. And my sensitivity is unbridled in that area. Don't talk to me about Clintonville. It's just like it's an area I don't even no, I'm just kidding. I don't really care. I don't really care. But if you live there, you probably actually live in Columbus, I think. Actually, I don't know, maybe it has borders. I don't know. Clintonville? Does Arlington Heights have borders? Does Police Without Borders have borders? It's like Families Without Borders. What is the actual organization called? Doctors Without Borders? I forget. Moms Without Borders? I think it's Doctors. Yeah, I signed up for Doctors Without Borders. It's really going to change my life, I think. Is that the same thing as the Peace Corps? Is it? I guess I'll find out. Doctors without stethoscopes. Doctors without diagnostic ability. Doctors without the will. Doctors without motivation. Doctors without desire. Doctors with no libido. Doctors with no natural organic attractions. Asexual doctors. So whenever that organization wants to develop asexual doctors, so you get the liberals, you get the conservatives, you get the liberals, and you get the conservatives. What was I saying before I went into this? It's like a subcomplex. I was saying the sound will reverberate in because I was about to give you just speech about the liberals versus conservatives, so strap your helmets on or whatever. That's what I was saying. That's the point that I was making. Strap your helmets on. It's time for that liberal conservative discussion that we've all been trying to avoid. I think here's what I'm thinking about. It's interesting that we graduated to the term liberal conservative from Democrat Republican, where it's like you're talking about the same dynamic, the same idea, the same divide between two political parties. that the two political parties, like when we graduated to the new term, it's not like the original parties deviated from their core beliefs that much, but what you're left with is a different ideal on either side, where for Republicans, the ideal originally was republicanism, and for Democrats it was being a Democrat. Like that was their ideal, but like it's kind of like at the point it's conservative, liberal, maybe it's easier to understand that these are ideologies, that the political parties are ideologies, because you can make more of an ideology out of conservatism than you can out of republicanism, because like Republican and Democrat as terms are actually just kind of sound similar to each other. Republic and Democrat. I mean, I know that people who grew up with it more so than me, or live their entire lives with like Democrat, Republican being the dynamic, could probably tell you more about the difference in just the words, which I guess I can't really do offhand. Say what's the difference between Democrat and Republican, but like what would be represented is a different ideological striving in each one of those, where like a Republican, like that should ultimately be represented by the term, but like you can see how ideologically conservatives conserve, because they're in the interest of preserving the way that things are, like they're preserving the country, and liberals are in the interest of being more free and being more liberal, or being more generous with themselves and with their bodies and whatever. They're going to talk about sex. Like a liberal is going to say that sex is like an extreme liberal, a far end liberal, like an extreme of liberalism, or like the typical liberal whatever, or just an extreme view of it is that liberals think sex is involuntary, conservatives think it is voluntary. But that would just be that I'm telling you that conservatives like they give power to the mind over the body, and the liberals give power to the body over the mind, is like an equivalent statement. Like liberals give power to the body over the mind, but it's more a liberal is going to just have sex and different positions of sex, like the dirty speech about it, euphemisms. That's just going to be part of their vocabulary. They're just going to have sex in their vocabulary, and they're interested in what sex other people have had. Is a liberal is going to be more interested in that, because they understand it to be just more in regular integrated part of life, is the sex that you have. That's what a liberal thinks. So they're going to have discussions revolving around it. It's a topic that's more out in the open for them, and it's just like because they understand people to just be motivated by their body and just understand sex to be a natural thing. So they're just like more dirty about how they would talk about sex, or don't care about saying things or discussing what sex that they've had or whatever, is a liberal. And a conservative, like an extreme conservative, just typically speaking, or like an extreme view of it, is that a conservative would think that sex is voluntary, or that it's like not motivated by your body, that you choose what sex you have. And it's like they don't give power to your biology to inhibit you from your choice. A conservative, they don't give power to biology to inhibit you from choosing. They just give power to your mind to choose. And so they're going to remain relatively more delusional than a liberal, or at least that's a liberal will call that delusional behavior, because a liberal thinks that you're predestined, because a liberal thinks that you will be predestined or whatever. They think that you are already bound to do what your biology is aiming you to do, because there's nothing you can do about your biology. You're just predestined to do whatever you are. You're like more primitive, or you're like an animal, is more a liberal point of view. Like you're more free you're more free physically. And a conservative doesn't give power to your biology inhibiting you from choosing. They just say that ultimately, like a really far conservative is going to be totally about you just get to choose whatever you are, and they don't give power to your biology to stop you. And so so liberals are more about the scientific things and physicality and practical things. and maybe even mechanical intelligence, or like the anatomy of something, the anatomy of a body or the anatomy of a car, where like the anatomy of a body like is kind of like a mechanical intelligence, because it's an intelligence that would involve the machinery of the inner workings of the body, as opposed to the machinery of the inner workings of a car. Like mechanical intelligence is more of a liberal thing, but it speaks to more of a looking down on everything that we already know, like that you are. It's in liberals are more engaged in the body of knowledge that we already have, and they give power to the body of knowledge that we already have, or rationality as it exists in the moment. But that speaks to a mechanical intelligence, but it's kind of like a view that God would have, but an authoritative view. Liberals are more about an authoritative view. But I just want to let me say the other side of that. Like, liberals are more about an authoritative view. They're more, because an authoritative view is going to give you it's like a mechanical intelligence view, or a view from the perspective of God instead of from the perspective of a man, or a view from the perspective of infinity is a mechanical intelligence, or a perspective of God is a mechanical intelligence, but the view from the perspective of man is a finite intelligence and looks up at what could possibly be and imagines what could possibly be. But like a authoritative viewpoint that like looks over, that already knows the inner workings of a car, already has that in the body of knowledge. Like the inner workings of a car, that's already been mapped out. It already exists a certain way, the same way as a body. We didn't always know the inner workings of the body, but like I guess generally since the beginning of cars, people have understood the total anatomy of a car. And it's just that if you have the mechanical intelligence of knowing the inner workings of a car, you could fix whatever with a car. You're a great mechanic. That's like you know how everything goes together in something that already exists this way. Like there's no changing it. There's no imagination that's supposed to be involved. Like you have to use your imagination to understand how it's all connected. Like, because that's a different kind of intelligence, or a different use of your intelligence, of your imagination, is one where you understand how everything is already connected within something like a car. Like you have to use your imagination for that. It's just that there's no interpretation with it. There's no like going forward, making different assessments about it, because there's no interpretation with the way that a car is put together. Like the way that any Volkswagen Jetta or whatever, the way that a Honda CR-V is put together is the way that a 2014 Honda CR-V is put together, is already put together that way. There's no interpretation on how it's put together. It is put together one way, and that's like a view from the perspective of God, because from the perspective of man, I guess I'm saying a conservative is more interested in the perspective of man, which is one that's more individualistic, or one that gives power to the individual finite man to try to describe the heavens in a different way than in whatever way the man deems to be the best way, or like according to his own logic. Like conservative is going to give power to the individual to describe things from their own logic, but because they don't approach things acting like things are already set in place. They approach things from an interpretational standpoint, do conservatives, to try to discover things, or be like philosophical, or present an idea and have their own interpretation on that, to connect it to other ideas in an analogous fashion, like to discover commonalities between ideas. But it's more interpretational. But it is more, conservatism is more naturally interpretational, just by virtue of they give power to the individual, or at least they would aim to, in a lot of cases, give power to the individual. And once power is with the individual, then it is a matter of interpretation, because you're not talking about a unified body of knowledge that's agreed upon across many individuals, which is more something a liberal wants. You're talking about something that's just true to an individual that is then up to interpretation. But like that there's the ability to interpret is just the opposer to a predestination worldview, is a free will view that opposes a predestination, is the ability to interpret things, or like say that even you yourself are up to interpretation, that you get to choose your identity, that you aren't set in stone. Like a conservative operates off of ever changing volatile body of knowledge, but a liberal is more interested in a body of knowledge that is set in stone, that already exists, that they can operate from, that's like scientific. Now I know that science does change, but I use that word as associated with liberals because liberals are more concerned with the physical world, or their relationships with the physical world, or their physical actions, or the way that the body interacts, or whatever, or like a viewpoint that, because scientifically, as far as science describes the world around us, we have mapped the entire world and know the general scientific principles of it. I mean, science as a term, as I've described before, is too general, and I don't know that term can even survive, because it's like something that you make a god, like you make Michael Jackson the god of talent, and then make it so that you yourself aren't allowed to have talent, because we've built up talent to only be with the talented people. Like we do that with science too, but what we see with academia somewhat being under fire, but especially with the mainstream media taking sides just with the word science, like general science, what we see with that is the destruction of the term as something that we distance ourselves from, because it's just becoming, we see the process of it becoming interpretational to everybody, where individual people are seeing themselves as being able to speak on science, as long as like they'll see themselves as able to do that the more that they're able to approach science. But individuals see themselves as capable of approaching science the more that it's up for interpretation. Apparently, the more that it's delivered to them that way, the more that they see, like, the narration of the country uses the term science irreverently. They use the term disrespectfully to just say anything. Like when the term is not revered is when everybody else gets to use it, is when everybody else sees themselves as not subject to it anymore. But like, yeah. So, but like I say that it's like from the perspective of God, if you know the inner workings of a car, because that's like the car is entirely enclosed the same way that like an area would be enclosed. Like it's a totally mapped and enclosed area in which you understand the entire way that the area is. You understand the way that it's mapped, the way that it goes together. I guess it'd be like the same thing to understand the total borders of a city and all the ways that the cities, towns and boroughs interacted with each other, the way that those are all connected. But I mean, that's actually that wouldn't be as easy as understanding a city, because a city would be a two-dimensional view of it, of an area that you understood the inner workings of, whereas a car is three-dimensional and has many different it's way different. It's a lot different, actually. But it's, you understand something that's already been mapped entirely. It's like you have the perspective of God about it. But if you don't know the area around you, like the way that man currently looks up at the rest of the universe, they haven't mapped the universe, so they're left to speculate on and wonder on what's within it. Like that's a finite perspective where you don't know. You haven't included the rest of the universe into your body of knowledge, so you can't look back at your body of knowledge and see the universe, so you don't understand the entire universe the same way that you could look back at a car and it's possible to see the entire car. It's more a perspective, an authoritative perspective. But liberals are more about the authority of things, but they're more about physical things. They're more about the physical, and conservatives, I'd say, are more about the metaphysical. And it's like, but they're more about the mind, and liberals are more about the body. And I would say that liberals are not, like, liberals are destructive and conservatives are destructive. Like, they both have problems with authority. I would say liberals and conservatives both have problems with authority, but like, your problem with authority is your desire to evolve the world in some direction. Is like your desire to change is your problem with authority, because to the extent that you deconstruct authorities, as you are moving the needle of whatever realm those authorities existed in, so that you deconstruct some authority and then substitute it with a new one, like the way that you develop a new technology or whatever. You deconstruct authority. But I'd say that both sides like to deconstruct authority. Both sides like to deconstruct authority. Liberals like to deconstruct the authority of words or ideas, because they don't care about words. They don't care so much about the English language. But like, conservatives really uphold language, or uphold the sanctity of the words coming out of their mouth. Like, they think your words have to be accurate. Maybe, I think so. And so they're more interested in, like, the way that they would attack authority is they would attack physical authority that stands. The way that a liberal would attack authority, they would attack like mental authority or ideas or words. They'd attack the borders around words, whereas a conservative would attack the borders around physical objects or like physical corporations, like a CNN or something. And maybe liberals are going to destroy a word. Like, they're going to make racist ubiquitous so that it applies to everybody. Like, whether or not they're trying to do that, but that's just a way that they attack authority. But do conservatives do that? Do they attack a word the same way? Like, let me test that out. I don't think, but I mean, I think that's just the consequence of that, is the liberals aim to control the country's narration somehow, or that the mainstream media becomes mostly liberal, is because it's just a mainstream media thing to devalue words in that way, or make words ubiquitous. Like, that's just a byproduct of the actions of a mainstream media, is that they kind of destroy words rather than that they would destroy physical. But I mean, media would destroy anything, whatever. I don't know about that last thing I said. But I can't really think of an example. I'm just saying that conservatives don't have the control over the narration of the country that liberals do. And so they're not able to put forth an idea to make it ubiquitous to everybody in order to destroy it. Like, they don't have the resources to do that. Liberals do, because they have the mainstream media. Like, so they can play a lot of games with the way that people believe in the authority of words, more so by painting everybody as a racist, or painting everybody as a Trump supporter, or like painting every Trump supporter as deplorable or something. And I know that there's like backlash at Clinton when she called them deplorable, but painting every Trump supporter as a racist or a redneck or something, like, when not all of them are, or just painting them all as stupid, is something that the liberals are able to do because of the resources they have with the media. But like, the conservatives don't do that. But I think a conservative isn't going to do that because they don't play that game. You know, they think liberals are liars, but they're not going to play the game of trying to ubiquitously assign a term to them. I don't know if that happens that same way. Like, they're not like all liberals are. Like, when they come up with a term for liberals, they think they're really snide and clever about it, and it's not like they aim to give it to every liberal. They just like the cleverness they just like the logic of the theory. Like, they're just going to come up with a theory or a conspiracy is a conservative, but that's just because they live within their imaginations. Because they imagine conspiracy theories, they imagine scenarios that could play out that go really wrong, but they imagine conspiracies. They get more paranoid than the left. The left doesn't do paranoia so much. They just try to get conservatives to think that they're conspiring against them, maybe to make them look worse or something, make them look like delusional morons, or like, because a liberal, I'm just talking about a true liberal or a true conservative. It's not like these people really exist in a lot of cases. I'm just talking about an extreme liberal. To me, is somebody who they don't care something about appearance. Like, maybe conservatives really care about appearance, but liberals don't. Or like, liberals understand that things are just for appearance, so they don't really care so much about the way that something would sound, as long as they're moving forward with an action. They don't care about, a liberal doesn't care about how something sounds, and so they're not worried about the indictments brought about by conservatives towards them that are conspiracy theories. They're not worried about suspicions from conservatives. They're not worried about accusations from them. They're not worried about conservatives' accusations because maybe they don't care about the way that something sounds, or they don't have the dignity of caring so much about losing in an argument or something. Like, liberals don't really care about the way that they sound because they don't revere language that way, the way that a conservative would. But like, a conservative is like, everything is based on the language, because that's what they find connections through in order to philosophize and theorize about greater conspiracies, so that they can have an individualized view on the world, or understand meaning to exist for themselves. Like, a conservative has to find meaning through their individuality, or they just think that their like meaning to them has to come from them individually. Yeah, it's just like, that's an extreme, like an extreme liberal would say that meaning comes from everybody being on the same page, or like from understanding the way that things are supposed to be, or like meaning comes from everybody understanding that they're equal to each other entirely. Like, conservatives don't really believe in everybody being equal to each other. They believe in some amount of individuality, person to person, so that individuals have the ability to realize their dreams still. They need a competitive environment, does a conservative. And like, not all of these match up like across the board. Like, there's probably any one of those that I said, like I'm saying a conservative thrives in a competitive environment, or they want to realize a world that is a competitive one, where liberals want to realize a world that is free. But that's what their liberal ideal is liberal freeness for everybody. Free equalness, equality for everybody is their ideal. Conservatism, it doesn't speak to competition just by the name conserving. Like, that doesn't speak to competition just very easily from their ideal, but it does speak to like living in the past. Or it's really difficult to say which one is, if either one of the two of those is more oriented with the past or with the future. Conservative, liberal, so it's like I couldn't make an assessment for all of them. But like, conservatives want a competitive environment because they believe in your identity as a choice, because they believe in making fun of other people's identities, tearing down other people's identities, so that their identity or their ego is the one that people find influence in. Like, conservatives want a competitive environment. Like, that's just fun for them. They want a fun environment. A competitive environment is a fun environment, or is an environment where you get to try to seek attention from people, or try to realize a world where you're deserving of more attention than the next person over. But a world where that's just a competitive world is where different individuals get to rise above all the other individuals. Like, the striving for first place, or capitalism, is a conservative value. Striving for first place, has to do with you saying that you have the ability within your imagination to reorient your identity so that you can discard negative qualities within yourself and aspire towards positive qualities, or you can accumulate positive qualities, filter out negative ones in order to better yourself, because you have all this agency over yourself to orient yourself in the right direction. Like, conservatives think that they can choose themselves into first place. They can beat out other people. They can see what's going on in the other competition, define their competitors, and rise above their competitors to be the most undefinable, is what conservatives desire to do. But what comes with the territory of that is that you make fun of other people's identities, like you poke holes in them, but that's just because that's the environment you enjoy, where people have the ability to tear you down, because there's more risk competitive, because people can tear you down or you can tear other people down. But that's just a different side of things than a liberal, like somebody who's extremely a liberal, or just like general liberal ideology is the equality of all people, rather than each person has some sort of individual value separating them. There's no competition for a liberal ideology. Everybody's free, everybody's equal, like everybody. But since everybody's equal, that's what makes them all free. In the same way that if everybody had the same amount of money, there would be no money. There would be no reason for money. Like if everybody had $1 million, nobody would be rich or poor. They want that kind of free, like just equality. But that's what their name is, what they will sell you on. But like what I'm saying is, like, it's not like not like all of them will totally match up, and that's part of that is because, well, it's just that there's a lot of people that are conservative that have liberal tendencies. There's a lot of people that are liberal that have conservative tendencies. And I think we understand more and more in the world that people shouldn't just be put into one of the two boxes, but that qualities of both sides of it appear in different people, and that it's like a spectrum between the two extremes, where everybody falls somewhere on the spectrum. In the middle of the spectrum is somebody who's exactly 50% liberal, 50% conservative, but then like half of the territory of that spectrum is given over to conservatism, and then half of it is given over to liberalism, as long as you're considering the spectrum. And then the very middle of it is like an absolute middle, where it's 50% somebody who is hypothetically exactly half liberal and half conservative. That's where they would fall on that spectrum. But it's like, so I'm just saying there's some significance to the middle part of it, as the same way there's a lot of significance to the absolute extremes of absolute liberal on the left and absolute conservative on the right. But it's arbitrary whether or not you say conservative or liberal is on the left or the right in that scenario where you're posing the spectrum. But yeah. So everything I said wouldn't apply exactly to liberals and conservatives, because there's like, we haven't specified the ideal enough. I think what I was saying before was we graduated from a Democrat-Republican dynamic to a liberal-conservative dynamic in our language, and that's just something that transpired naturally. Like, that's just some change that naturally came about. We just started talking about this same dynamic in a different pair of words. And that's like if you picture of a diameter of a circle, that's like the diameter of the circle slightly rotated a little bit within the circle so that a new diameter appeared, where you could kind of imagine the diameter to be a spectrum where half of it is conservative, half of it is liberal. But what you have is the original diameter slightly shifted within the circle to become a new one, and what you have is a slight deviation of the original dynamic, but that slight deviation is represented in a new term that represents something at least slightly different, because liberal is slightly different from Democrat based on the properties of the word. But it's interesting because the emphasis is so much on the divide, when the divide has been, so we graduated to liberal conservative instead of Democrat Republican. And I think that it's the case that you could continue to graduate to new words for the dynamic, for the divide, rather than that the divide would go away, because because I think what's happening now that's interesting, it seems to be coming to, it seems like it's coming to a conclusion or something like that. I guess that's the way it sort of feels. That, but my only evidence for that would be that people seem to be focusing on the divide itself rather than the rather than who's a liberal and who's a conservative. Like, people are starting to be interested in the divide or the polarization, partisanship of it. Like, why does partisanship arise from an issue like a physical issue like a pandemic? Like, why does that become politicized or partisan when it shouldn't? You wouldn't imagine that it would, but somehow right when it happens, like, it becomes a conservative versus a liberal issue just because of inherent qualities within Americans. Like, the American divide is so inherent that things just, like regular issues that America is faced with, half of the people are on this side of it and half of the people are on the other side of it. And so it's like we're kind of starting to focus on the divide now, and a lot of the questions surrounding modern day political thought are, how are we going to heal the divide? What are we going to do to fix the partisanship? And which is kind of interesting because the divide has existed the entire time that America has existed. It's just like, I think maybe we just didn't focus on the divide quite as much. Like, the focus on the divide is probably always in the background, seeing as that there's a war between the two political parties for all of America's existence. Like, there, you could probably already focus on the divide whenever you wanted. It's just that, like, at this point we're focusing on the divide to the extent that we're like, oh, it is the divide that is the problem, or like that we're interested in the philosophy of the duality of America right now, probably more so than we've ever been. But I guess I don't know that if 150 years ago people were focusing on the divide. But I'm saying that with, like, the divide has always existed that way, so that you're trying to fix a divide, I'd say doesn't really make a lot of sense. That just speaks to that you're focusing on the divide, because we've always had two parties. Now, there's been elections where we had a third party, or we had a fourth party. Like, there's some early ones, I think in the late 1700s or 1800s, that there were like four viable candidates, like Henry Clay, and was running against Andrew Jackson, but there was like two other people with two other parties, and like all four of the parties got some electoral votes. Like, there were some elections like that where there's a third and fourth party, but even with that, the elections have always trended towards two parties. Like, even if there's an election year where there's a third party candidate that they get some percentage of the vote or whatever, it trends toward there being two again, because after a couple of election cycles, it's back to two, and it, generally speaking, back to Democrat versus Republican for our entire existence. Now, I think the original Republicans are like Democrats now, like whatever you would have originally called Republican became Democrat, and then Republican went away for a long time, and then the modern day Republican Party originated in the 1860s during the Civil War. The modern day Republican Party came back up during the Civil War, but there was an original Republican Party before that died, that I think is closer to what the Democrats are now, or something like that. I'm not totally sure, but both parties have changed sides on issues during it, but we've still stuck with the name Democrat Republican basically throughout the entire thing, and now we've graduated, and now we're not doing that all of a sudden. Like, that's an interesting new take on it. That's an interesting deviation, and it would be like, I guess you'd say, but to me, what's important about the dynamic is we always tend toward there being two. If there is an election year where there's a third viable candidate, after a couple of election cycles, it's back to two. We seem to trend toward this two-way divide, or like that's the best way we can communicate our political division, or where like politics is kind of just like it's just kind of competing philosophies within the individual that is America. Like, it's philosophy. It's just that we channel our philosophical speech through politics is the best we can do for speaking philosophically, because otherwise we just recognize philosophy to be an unapplicable medium. But it is an applicable medium. It's just that we do politics through it. So if you like philosophy, then you are somebody who gets involved in politics, or you have political opinions. If you like philosophy. And so, like, we've always had, for whatever reason, we trend toward there being two major competing philosophies, and generally speaking, the names of them have been Democrat, Republican for our entire existence. But now they've changed all of a sudden within the last 4 years. It's just like you would predominantly call it conservative versus Republican, and I think that speaks to an increasing rate of change just across the country overall due to technology, but maybe like an increasing rate of change just of the mindset of the country, but not just of the country, of the world. Like I think our mindsets change rapidly alongside technology. I think we're just in an accelerated rate of change overall, but in correlation with exponential rate of change of technology, or something like that. But that's just a theory. But if that theory was true, what you'd see is another deviation of the dynamic into a different term, so that the diameter rotated a second degree over from, so that the first rotation was liberal conservative, and then the next rotation is a different dynamic, but still divided between two major philosophical arguments, or two major political parties. Like if we were really in an accelerated mindset like I'm describing, then pretty soon we would arrive at another deviation of the dynamic into two different words. But what I'm saying is that I don't think you can solve the division. I don't think but it remains to be seen, like, what happens once we actually, now that we're focusing on the division, does that clear up the division? Are we able to just see it as a duality and then therefore not care about our differences anymore? Because that would be the true realization of duality across everybody. If everybody realized both sides would be totally equal, meaning that like there is a duality there, then that would kill all the animosity. If everybody saw both sides to be equal, if everybody identified as middle of the row. But I don't think that's possible. But that would kill the divide if everybody's like, oh, it doesn't, because you'd see both sides as equal, and so you'd understand that it's just if you just saw that liberals hate conservatives, and like people are liberal, they are that way, they'll be against conservative ideology. Conservatives are already that way, will always be against liberal ideology. If you saw it that way, you would see both of them as equal, and so then it kind of kills the animosity of it. But like, I don't think that that's possible, seeing as that our country has maintained this same divide between two parties during our entire existence. And so what I project for it is that we will have an accelerated rate of change where we will more rapidly deviate from our original terms. So what I would be interested in is a new dynamic, a new pair of terms for the dynamic already on the horizon. Are we already starting to use it in our language, and it's going to overtake us, so that we have a new name to call the dynamic that's slightly different from what we had before, which then evolves the dynamic into a new opposition, a new dynamic, makes it slightly different. Like, is the term for that already on the horizon, or is that like a ways off, or is that just not the case at all, But like, I guess I'm projecting, or I would say that we're in an accelerated rate of change, so you'll see a new name for the dynamic more rapidly than you would think, and then after that you would see another new name, and then another new name, and then another new name, and like, it would happen rather quickly that you would have different names for the political parties, and at some point it would be happening, the changes for the names would be happening so fast that it would be hard to pin down what the authority of the two parties were anymore, because if they're changing fast enough, then it's difficult to profile somebody who's in either one of them, and you just kind of lose sight of the significance of the dynamic when the dynamic is always changing, if the names of it are always slightly changing and incorporating different qualities, so that you can't profile who would be on either side. Like, that would naturally lessen the importance of it or the animosity of it when people aren't able to see evil in the other side or profile the other side. And they would have difficulty doing that if it was more rapidly changing. If it was more rapidly changing that you couldn't understand who a conservative was or who a liberal was, that's what would kill the divide to me, is a rate of change that, because I'm saying that, like, you wouldn't, all of the things that I described for conservatives are this and liberals are this, they don't exactly apply now. We created the conservative liberal term off of Republican Democrat because that's a more intelligent conclusion for it. It's a more intelligent description of Republican Democrat. It's more specified. It gets more at the heart of who is in each side of it. Like that Republicans, a better description for that is conservative. It's more intelligent. So I'm saying we're going to arrive at more intelligent conclusions to describe the dynamic. We'll just arrive at different words that are descriptions of the same ideals. But you only arrive at a new pair of terms when a new set of people like either switches from liberal to conservative or switches from conservative to liberal, or just when a new set of people is incorporated into either side, so that either side gets a new quality that slightly changes their definition, rendering their new definition to be a different title, so, and that would happen the more that different qualities are seen in liberals and conservatives than what you currently understand to be seen in liberals and conservatives. So it's like drug use is becoming more prevalent. That's a bigger topic. Like drugs themselves are more prevalent in the world, and the use of them is more prevalent in the country than it used to be. So it would be interesting to see what that changes about a conservative liberal dynamic. Like, is it conservatives that are going to be on the side of smoking weed, or is it liberals? Because you'd think it'd be liberals, but it seems to me like that's becoming more of it's more like conservatives are advocating for the use of weed. Like, weed is ubiquitous across liberals and conservatives, kind of like alcohol. They're both fine with weed, but like harder hallucinogens like mushrooms or acid, like, is that more of a conservative? Like, if we incorporate those more into society, is that more conservative people will do that, or liberal people will do that? And at the point that a large section of people who are like drug users are incorporated into either side, is like you would change the definition of the side to include that, and then you would have a slightly altered definition and arrive at a new one. But so I guess I'm saying, like, you could end the divide might end just by us not being able to profile either side, and that would only happen with a greatly accelerated rate of change that causes the titles of either side to be volatile, to not stay the same for very long. But I mean, that's what that is. There you go, folks. Thanks for coming back and listening. I talked myself out of being able to be excited about putting forward a good ending, is what it feels like to me. Like, I talk myself, so I gotta talk my way back up to it. Gotta get excited for this ending. Here we go. Here comes this passionate ending. Here we go. Or this enthusiasm for my ending is gonna be unbridled. It's gonna be unlike anything you've ever seen before. Standing 5'11" tall, somebody in the world. Okay, because I'm 6 foot, but I started with 5 foot, so then I had to say 11 inches to get close to what my actual height was, as if I needed to be describing myself with the hypothetical person I was announcing the height for. So introspection, that's what I close with. My introspective self. Do you like the introspective nature of it, or does it nauseate you? It's a question you'll have to answer. I can't answer that question for you. And so goodbye.